Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our fourth installment of Introduction to United States Government. I'm Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. So today, we're actually going to do like a big picture overview of what is involved in U.S. government. Like I've said in previous lessons, this is not comprehensive. This is meant to be an introduction. So any questions you have, any concerns, feel free to write them down, keep them in mind as we go through the content, as we go through the course. You'll have more than plenty of time to answer those questions and to ask them and to get more clarity on that. So without further ado, here we go. One of the things I like to talk about right out of the gate is the idea that the Constitution was not the first form of U.S. government, all right? Not the first form of U.S. government. The Constitution was our second try, okay? That was our do-over, all right? It was also not easily adopted. There's been a romanticization of the founding. Everybody was in agreement on everything, and it was lovely, and it was wonderful. First of all, it wasn't lovely for everybody. It was only lovely for a particular class of people. The second thing is it was not any of those things. I mean, there were fistfights that broke out in the convention in Philadelphia. I mean, these men were serious. I mean, deep disagreements. On so many different occasions, the Constitution almost didn't happen. It almost didn't happen. Okay, we almost didn't have a Constitution. That was extremely intensely fought. Okay, so in order to understand all of this, we need to know the historical timeline. Okay, and how we arrived at the Constitution, because again, that was our second try. All right, we had something else first, and it also bears mentioning that this was a brand new form of government. The first time any society truly attempted self-government was us, and in the conception that we did it. Okay, we took from some ancient democratic and republican traditions, such as ancient Rome and even ancient Athens, and we took from that. But we also took from several other suggestions and theories of government to create something entirely different. So Alexis de Tocqueville was a French author, and he toured the United States, went around visiting areas of the United States in the 1800s, and he called the United States the great experiment for the world. Now, great meaning big, large, like it was a huge undertaking, not necessarily that it was like the greatest country he'd ever seen. Because if you read Mr. de Tocqueville, he comes up with quite a few criticisms. But we braved a new world here. This was something that had never been done before, and we were bound to make mistakes. Let's start with the first mistake, which was the Articles of Confederation. This was the first form of government of the United States, and it did some good things. Okay, it did some good things, but really it was more of an epic fail. It was not an effective system of government by any stretch of the imagination. There was only one branch, and that was the legislative. States could do whatever they wanted and could ignore the National Congress, and it was a Congress, wasn't an executive. There was no executive, no president, just a Congress. We had a lot of war debt from the Revolutionary War, but the national government wasn't allowed, to raise taxes, so they couldn't pay the debt. They couldn't raise or maintain an army. They couldn't coin money. So therefore, because of all those reasons, they couldn't pay the war debt. They couldn't protect the new nation from foreign powers because they couldn't raise an army, and they couldn't enforce any laws. So basically, it was completely useless. All the states operated as if they were little independent countries that could do what they wanted. Georgia could negotiate a treaty with Spain that would totally, harm South Carolina, and there was nothing to be done about it. And Georgia could be like, whatever, off with you, and I'm going to do it because it's good for me. Meanwhile, South Carolina is getting hosed over there. So it was bad. It was bad on several levels. There were a lot of problems. So we had to come together and figure out something else. So that brings us to the debate of the Federalists versus the Anti-federalists. Okay, you had people who were the Federalists. They approved of the Constitution. They were trying to get people to ratify it. The Anti-federalists were against the Constitution. They wanted to maintain the Articles of Confederation and just fix them, tweak them. The people who represented the Federalists, Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, John Adams. And then, of course, for the Anti-federalists, you have Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Patrick Henry. Madison is interesting, though, and I want to pause here because Madison ended up becoming kind of a Federalist. Like, he kind of became a Federalist a little bit. But he was an interesting combination of ideas. But we'll get to him. We'll get to him, but we'll get to him later. So what did the Federalists want? They wanted a strong central government. They thought the Articles of Confederation was not good times. It was bad times, right? They feared the common man making national decisions. So the more power and authority your average person had, the worse the government would be. And they didn't think a Bill of Rights was necessary. On the opposite end, the Anti-Federalists were like, no, 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 no. We need a limited central government. We just got rid of a powerful tyrannical central government, you want to like make another one? This is not a good idea. They thought the Articles of Confederation were great times. They said, these are good times. We just got to tweak it. There are some problems. We acknowledge this. We just got to tweak it a little, and it'll be fine. They did have faith in the common man to make good decisions. And they argued that, especially if you're advocating for a strong central government, we need a Bill of Rights. We need certain rights that are broken down, that are enumerated, and enumerate means to list, okay, that are specifically listed, that says, no government, you cannot touch this. And, the Anti-Federalists were onto something. Because if you look at how the internet is being regulated now, in some ways, it's interesting because the government can regulate the internet in ways, and television and radio, in ways that it cannot regulate the print media, because only print media, like newspapers, like hard copy, like printed newspaper, that's the only thing that existed when our Constitution was founded. So some lawmakers have taken some creative license and they're like, oh, well, the Constitution doesn't say that I can't regulate television, so I'm going to regulate it. So actually, we have the most freedom with print media, the least government control, and that is due to the Bill of Rights. So we got some good things from both of these guys, but these two were debating and going at it. So the Constitution was, of course, ratified. But before it was ratified, after the founders agreed and they said, okay, we're going to have this Constitution, they had to sell it. Okay. And one of the ways that they sold it was by producing these anonymous Federalist papers. It was produced by Publicus. Now, we know who they are now. They're not anonymous anymore. But when these papers were published, nobody knew who the authors were. And they wanted that to be on purpose because they wanted the arguments in the papers, the ideas in the papers, to be viewed in an objective way. They didn't want people to be like, oh, well, I hate James Madison, so I automatically hate what he wrote. Or I love James Madison, so I automatically love what he wrote. They wanted people just to respond to the arguments in the papers. So what were they? They were a series of 85 essays that were describing the new government and selling it, explaining why this was positive, why the powers and the restrictions and just all the intricacies of the new government that they created were good times. They were written by three people, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution. He did a lot of the nitty-gritty writing of it, finalizing. He was also the secretary during the Constitutional Convention. John Jay only wrote a few papers. The vast majority of the Federalist Papers were written by these two guys, by Hamilton and Madison. They were circulated from 1787 to early 1788. They were successful. The Constitution was eventually ratified. But one thing that's interesting to note about the Federalist Papers, they only circulated in New York State. New York was a big one. They had to get New York. New York had to agree to ratify, and people were concerned in New York. They weren't so sure they were going to do it. So the Federalist Papers were written for New Yorkers to convince them to say, hey, yes, let's go with this Constitution. So now we have a Constitution, but the Anti-Federalists won this battle. Okay, they won this battle. They got their Bill of Rights. The Federalists said, okay, if you're going to vote to ratify, we'll give you a Bill of Rights. And these are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Like I said, the Anti-Feds would not ratify or approve without it. And I said earlier, we should thank them all for this. So amendments 1 through 9 deal with basic rights of citizens for the most part. Amendment 10 deals with states' rights. The idea that we have two layers of power in the national government. Okay, you have what the federal government is in charge of and what the state governments are in charge of. So Amendment 10 speaks to that. And Amendment 10 gets us to sectionalism, and sectionalism will get us to the Civil War. So we'll talk more about that later on. But it's really important that we pay attention to these amendments. These amendments have, on the whole, been good. They've been very, very positive and have helped us maintain our freedom throughout our country's history. All right, so now let's go through a little, again, brief intro. We're going to have a whole unit on this where I'm going to go into deep detail, but this is big picture, right? So there's a complex structure, okay? The Constitution in its origins was limited government. It's based on this thing called a federalist system. You will need to memorize this definition. Federalism. This is the division of power between a national government and several state governments, okay? National government, several state governments. Powers divided, okay? The only way to even pretend to try to preserve liberty is to prevent power from being concentrated. If power is concentrated in one place, you can guarantee corruption and you can guarantee that liberty will be destroyed. Freedom will be gone. So to prevent this concentration of power, we create a federalist system. It is important to note that founders did not trust the common people to make decisions generally. The Anti-federalists had more trust in the common man or common folks than the Federalists did. But as a whole, they really didn't trust your average farmer to make intelligent decisions. They feared tyranny of the majority, that uneducated people would be swayed by emotional arguments, not rational ones, and that because the masses weren't educated, they were therefore unprepared. They had no idea how to properly govern things. So they were concerned about this. And the creation of a federalist system and the creation of a republic, it was thought, would help to guard against some of this. So, whoa, scary chart. Okay, it's not that scary. So here's the Constitution, okay? Key ideas, need to understand federalism. So see, I tell you to start here, right? So federalism, which is a division of power between a national government and then several state governments, right? There were Federalists and Anti-federalists. Federalists were pro-Constitution. Anti-federalists were against Constitution, right? So Federalist pro, Anti-federalist anti, right? So move into the three branches of government. That's important. This is yet another division of power, right? This is yet another division of power. This is why, there's some genius to our Constitution. I know some people have some problems with it, and there's some things we need to work out. Mistakes were made, but this was pretty ingenious at the time, right? So we have three branches of government: legislative, they make laws; executive, they execute the law; and judiciary judges the law. This leads us to separation of powers. Each branch has separate, different powers. This prevents, yet again, another layer. So we start with federalism as a layer to prevent concentration of power. The next layer is having three different branches. And then the next layer after that is that there are different powers for each branch. Which brings us to a fourth layer, checks and balances. Each branch of government can overrule the other. Checks, balance, prevents concentration of power. This was the ultimate goal, to prevent that power from being concentrated in one spot where corruption could grow. Okay, so this is, and you can pause the video, take a look at this. This is self-explanatory. It's a big overview. We're going to do a whole unit just on the three branches where we will spend lots of time going through all of it. So don't feel like you have to memorize this now, but just a brief intro, right? Talked a little bit about this on the previous slides. You can pause it, write it down. We'll revisit this later. Okay, again, how it all works, right? So this is another visual representation that shows our divided government. So you can pause this, take a look at it. If you have any questions, just ask, let me know. And okay, this is an example of checks and balances. Again, we're going to go into detail about this in future video lessons, in future units, but I just wanted to introduce to you some examples of how the checks and balances work, right? So there are but tons of other examples you could use to illustrate checks and balances, but these are just a few. And that is the end. We have come to the end of our introduction of United States government, ladies and gentlemen. Now, my folks, I will be posting this PowerPoint on Google Classroom, just the PowerPoint by itself. So if you'd like to take a look at that on your own, feel free. At the end of that PowerPoint, I have a breakdown of some key vocabulary that I don't feel the need to go through in a video lesson. So please check that out, write that down. But I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you in the next video.